following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
You're back, Talkin Baseball in the Zone. I'm Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and this is a Christmas Eve 2017 program, and the house is full. Unfortunately, the first topic we're going to discuss is the passing of a terrific baseball broadcasting, all sports, broadcasting icon, Dick Enberg. And I've invited Tony D'Angelo, among a bevy of folks from the network who are here this morning to talk about Mr. Enberg's life a little bit. Tony, welcome back to the show.
And thank you, and good morning to all of you guys. You're in mourning. Mourning actually has two meanings here. You know, we're mourning the passing of Mr. Enberg, and it's actually mourning in some parts of this call.
Yes, it is. Hi, Tony. It's Ronnie.
Hi, Ronnie.
Hi, Tony.
David Hubler.
Hi,
Gabriel Schechter. Chad Rubin. Gene Hutmaker is here. Am I leaving anybody out? If I am, I'm sorry. Oh, good.
God, it's a veritable romper room.
We are a romper room of baseball crazies who and sports nuts. Where after speaking about Mr. Enberg, the discussion is going to lean towards expansion teams in our lifetime, because baseball never before 1961 had more than 8 teams in the league. And we'll get to talk about what caused it, what precipitated it, Branch Rookies Continental League, and what have you. But I would like Tony to talk and lead us in a discussion about Dick Enberg.
Well, I'm sure, the guys up and down the line have plenty to say, but this was a man, as I look back on him, as old as I may be and as long as I could go back in sports, he was always broadcasting something. Now, I remember him actually way back when doing boxing matches on tape. Actually, they were played on tape in the East Coast, but I'm sure they were live on the West Coast, from the Coliseum in Los Angeles and from the Olympic Auditorium. He was also doing college basketball. Later on, he did Sports Challenge, which really is, one of my favorite sports game shows, just not only because of the characters that you have on there, but just because of the history that's involved. And then went to do the Angels and had a remarkable academic career, and through it all just kept his class and his poise and his modesty. And I think that I'll just share this one thought, because I know all the guys want to say something. Is that he had how could I put it? The great ones, and Zig and I talk about this a lot, is what is a great interview? Well, a great interview is like being a great umpire. Everybody knows about your guest, and nobody knows about you, and nobody cares about you, and that's how you've done the best thing you possibly can do. And that was Dick Enberg. It was about the event in front of him. Today, it's like, we all know who Jamel Hill is. Well, who the hell cares? I mean, I don't want to know about that. I want to know about the sport. And that's the thing, I think, that people like Scully and Enberg passed, that's the character that we're losing among us. But that's my thought.
Beautiful.
I agree with you. Tony, Dick Enberg was really a tremendous broadcaster. Sports, all different sports. I think his preference was baseball, but he did everything else. And he, like Vin Scully, are two of the greatest broadcasters of all time. And it's a big loss. It really is.
It really
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a modest man, when Scully, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but when Scully left broadcasting, I thought, at least we can follow Dick Enberg to the end. Well, he just retired that very next day, no fanfare. He said, "I'm done. Great career."
Yeah. Yeah.
I met him once.
And it was a great career. It was a great career.
I met Enberg once at the Hall of Fame, and he was just a quiet, self-effacing fan. That was the impression I had. And I got to listen to him in the 80s when he was doing the Angels games with Don Drysdale. And they were really a very good pair to listen to.
Yeah, Don passed much too early as well.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
You know, I was reading this an obit of Dick Enberg this morning, as a matter of fact, and one of the things that struck me about it was that he said the hardest sport to broadcast was baseball, and I thought, gee, you know, so many people think, well, baseball is slow moving. You can talk about any kind of thing, the way Phil Rizzuto used to go on Yankee broadcasts about everything and anything. Yeah. But it struck me that was part of Enberg's character, because he was so well prepared for every broadcast that he did that he found it important to know the ins and outs of all sports. And then when he translated this into baseball, he probably found it difficult to really, he said baseball was the most difficult sport to broadcast, I guess because for the uninitiated fan, the person who watches a game every once in a while or listens to a game once in a while, it doesn't seem like there's all that much to it. But because Enberg's expertise in the sport, he knew there was so much going on. When you see the fielders move 2 feet over to the right or 2 feet over to the left, he knew why they were doing that. And I think that was part of the reason that he said it was so difficult to broadcast a baseball game, as opposed to, say, a football game where there's running back and forth and the action more or less is continual, although I could argue that point too. But I think that's what was behind Enberg saying baseball was the toughest sport to broadcast.
Very interesting.
I know, like Vince Scully.
Hockey.
Uh-huh.
I would have guessed hockey. That's a surprise, and that was very but David Hubler, that explains why he thought that way. I just want to interject something about his quiz show, Sports Challenge.
Oh yeah, that's when I first started him.
Love that show.
I first became aware of him
through
that.
He did producing for the show, and arranged to get these teams of 3 guys each from all walks of life. You'd have football players on a panel against baseball players, but got to give some credit to the producer who got it, even if it wasn't Enberg, who got all that together, and just the idea and just the questions. And I remember a show, he had Joe DiMaggio on a panel with I remember it was Tommy Heinrich, but I can't think of the other former Yankee.
I think it was Charlie Keller, Zig, and then the other side you had Hank Bauer and Mantle and Billy Martin, and none of them could guess. Walter Alston is the mystery guest, and I'm saying to myself, they must have really gotten potted before they went. Oh, yeah, I know who he is. It's Bear Bryant. I was like, oh, please. His professionalism, he keeps a straight face. Yeah, you can watch that on YouTube. I'm laughing.
Well, I've noticed that I remember it, and I haven't seen it on YouTube, and I will definitely go back and watch it. I remember the intensity in DiMaggio and Heinrich's face when
Tommy Henrik,
while the competition was going on, they didn't want to lose. That was something that struck me from way back then.
They're very competitive.
Chad Rubin, you're younger, and I'm wondering how you remember Dick Enberg.
He telecasted all the big games. in the 80s. And that's how I remember him. I knew it was a big game if he was on it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he did indeed broadcast a lot of them. World Series, Super Bowls, this, that, and the other thing.
I think back to the Chargers-Dolphins game where Kellen Winslow had that huge playoff.
Oh, that game? Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And ever since then, that's what I thought of him as the big game, host. I never
he really was.
Final Fours, so.
Yeah.
But that's what, and he knew it was a big game, a big football game, if he was the guy. No different than you hear Al Michaels today.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gene Hutmaker.
Well, he was one of the best announcers, and he was completely opposite of Howard Cosell. He was never get involved with the team. I know he did San Diego, but he seemed to be like Vince Scully, the two best of all time. And I would say he's very, very good to listen to, a very good monotone voice.
Okay.
Well, that's one thing I remember about Enberg's style. A lot of guys today, and Tony mentioned Phil Rizzuto, they're overexcited to begin with. Mm-hmm. And Enberg was just a guy explaining what was going on. And when the "Oh My" came out, you knew it was really special.
Right.
He saved his excitement to match the excitement on the field. He didn't feel that he had to manufacture the excitement or interest in the game.
The "Oh My" was so Midwestern, so homegrown, if you will, spun, if you will. It made him seem as if he was just as impressed with the game as a fan. He was just impressed with the big play. Oh my, it's just.
Yeah, it was real because it wasn't one of these phony calls that you hear a lot of today. Everybody in the broadcasting industry who does play-by-play seems to try to outdo the others with some kind of ridiculous call for a home run or a touchdown or something like that. Where, oh my, it's just what anyone would say at any time when they were surprised by something.
Right, and it doesn't have to be sports.
Exactly.
It could be anything. Oh my!
But he knew also how to be quiet after he said "Oh my," so that everybody could take in the excitement of the fans and everything else that was going on. Today's broadcasters, they gotta keep talking and talking and talking. Vince Scully and Dick Enberg, they would be quiet. And they'd say, "Oh my," or whatever, and that was it. And they'd take it.
And I think the grandfather of all of that was Red Barber, and I think they must have been. I know Vince Scully worked with him, so he was in.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Red would just let the moment take center stage.
Yeah, especially on television broadcasts, certainly. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I often tell people that if they only know Vince Scully from his television work, that they don't know Scully at all. There's such a world of difference, even in a Scully, between radio and television, because anybody on television is a slave to the image, and he's vulnerable to it also.
Very few that can make the transition.
And it's an impossible transition because it's stepping down in class so far.
Well, originally it was not a question of making the transition because if you recall, early telecasts of baseball games was simulcast with the radio broadcast. So you had the same announcers doing both TV and radio.
Yeah.
And therefore it was hard for them to split the difference, let's say. They had to tell the story for the radio audience, but they were telling too much perhaps for the TV audience. So there was no win situation there.
Exactly. But Scully knew how to do it.
That is precisely why I enjoy games on the radio much more than on television.
Baseball is the best game in the world to listen to on the radio. Bar none.
Absolutely.
Right.
You can, and you don't have to have its full. If you're just listening and you're doing something in the background, you can tell by the tone of the voice of the announcer when to tune your attention to the game. And you're not limited by what the production crew of the television wants described visually, whereas the announcer on the radio and for radio broadcast, they're going to give you what they perceive to be important.
Yep.
And
well, they paint a picture in your head. The radio announcer paints a picture in your head when you listen to a baseball game. If he's good, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You know,
and Scully could do that, and Enberg could do that. Both of them.
When you heard Scully, you heard Enberg, you heard Joe Garagiola, and they were going very late into their 80s, and they were broadcasting, and I'd be doing something or other like the Steve says. I says, you know, as long as these men are behind the microphone doing what they do, I'm still a kid. I'm still young.
Right.
I'm still sitting on the floor of 41 Du Bois Street in Stamford, Connecticut, watching the game of the week with Joe Garagiola. The world is okay. Today, I don't have that same feeling, you know?
I don't either. Right.
If we don't use sports, baseball in particular, to escape the thoughts of what's going on in the world, we go nuts. We couldn't get up every day.
Totally right.
You're right.
Oh, yeah.
Totally. You're
Ralph? Ralph?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I rate announcers. The better they are, the less they annoy me. Now, the one that annoyed me most, and I don't know why, because network announcers especially, they have them cover everything. And personally, I wouldn't never, in all the years I've been following sports, which is now 67 years, I've never listened to or watched the game because somebody in particular was announcing.
Mm-hmm.
So Dick was very, very professional, I thought. You know, he and Marv Albert.
Remember when there was no announcer it was an NFL game?
Yes, you're right, Ralph. Yep.
And they
he and Marv Albert annoyed me very little. I mean, it wasn't Brett Musburger who infuriated me every time I put a game on. He was announcing, and on the ESPN side, I will not watch a game with Dick Vitale unless I mute it.
Oh, yes.
They make it all about themselves. These types make it all about themselves.
Absolutely.
Well,
I've gotten the same way with Bob Costas.
Yes,
in recent
absolutely.
years.
I can't.
This kind of self-importance that he attaches to whatever he deigns to attend.
Yes, and there isn't a minor statistic that he will not bring up several times during the course of a broadcast. It's insufferable to listen to him.
And it always, with Musburger and Costas, it always gets around to the betting, to the line, to the point spread, to this, that, or the other. They are acutely aware to the point where that sickens me. But not being judgmental about the gambling part, but I don't need to know what their preferences are in the middle of the game, what they'd like to see happen from that standpoint. We were spoiled. Most of us on this panel were New Yorkers, or in the tri-state area. Let's say we had Marty Glickman.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific announcer, great announcer.
So
he did everything from high school football to the New York Giants football games,
yes, he did.
Saturday and Sunday, and he had the same enthusiasm for a high school game played on Randall's Island Stadium to the New York Giants playing in Yankee Stadium. It was incredible. I always loved that.
My high school, Newtown in Queens, went to the finals of a soccer championship in the mid-'60s, the early to mid-'60s, and Marty Glickman announced a soccer PSAL, New York City, Newtown High School, go.
Amazing.
We went out there, just didn't watch any of the game. I don't remember watching the game at all. I just watched Marty Glickman on the sidelines in his coat, freezing his ass off and doing a soccer game.
Wow.
Years back, there was a guy that called, and when Bob Shepard finally retired from being the PA announcer at Yankee Stadium, "Your attention, please, ladies and gentlemen," quote unquote, the voice of God. And he was talking about when he was in college, like in the early 1960s, and he came back after a terrible hangover into his apartment, didn't know if he was going to live or die. That's how sick he was. And then he started hearing the voice of Bob Shepard. And what it was that Bob Shepard was working at a car lot down the street calling promotions for, we have the new 1950s.
Oh, my gosh.
This is it. I'm finally going to die.
That's very funny.
Well, I couldn't believe that he would ever retire. I came back from 7 years overseas, and we weren't living in New York anymore, so I didn't get to hear his announcing. But when I finally, I remember Bob Shepard from the 50s, and I couldn't believe it was the same guy. I mean, he must have started like he was 12, I thought.
He started in 1951.
Yeah.
1951 was his first
51 was the first year I went to Yankee Stadium. So I followed, that was the only voice I ever heard.
You did him by 2 years.
The interesting thing about Bob Shepard's career was that in the old days, if you remember, Shepard would announce the starting lineups and pitching changes, and that's it. Just a starting lineup and a batting change and a pitching. He wouldn't go the second time around. You were on your own, and so it made it much easier to be the PA announcer. Later on, and now of course they play walk-up music, and it's just. To me, it's all insanity. You'd listen to Bob Shepard, you'd get the scorecard, you put the lineup in your scorecard, and then you'd make the changes.
Off you go.
Off you go. Right. I didn't need to know the second, third time around. I knew them by then. So, he was a
life
legend.
in a Bob Shepard voice. Now looking for his keys.
Yeah.
keys. Yeah.
The announcer, John Miller, did a wonderful impression of him.
Yeah, John Miller did. He did a great impression. Absolutely.
Now making a pass on Tally.
And I thought it was particularly appropriate when Derek Jeter was playing his last year or so, that he insisted on the recording of Bob Shepard announcing him. I thought that was an incredibly nice touch.
If Derek Jeter went to Bob Shepard's funeral.
And he didn't?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I don't think many ball players did. It's a changing world we live in terms of how ball players relate to the press, how they relate to the fans, how they relate
and each other.
Yeah, probably, absolutely.
Well, there are no more long card games on those long train rides out to St. Louis. No, every ball player I've ever talked to from that era said, that's how we bonded. And they bonded with the sports writers, too, because they had all this time.
Yeah.
They left on Monday, and they didn't have to play till Thursday out in St. Louis.
Yeah, right.
And it was a different time, too. The sports writers weren't out to write a story about their personal lives.
No, very true.
So, which you can't blame the sports writers of today. You have to blame the editors who are responding to what the public wants.
Or seems to want.
Right.
Also, the back then the pay gap between the players and the writers was not very large.
That's
now
true
it's
too.
humongous.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
it
true.
It wasn't large, but it was significant. It was still, these guys made more than the average Joe. There was no question about that. And and the sports writers were notoriously underpaid back then. I don't know how it is today. I think the market of where you see a lot of sports writers are doing analyst work on television, like in the World Series. Think of the two in particular, but they were assuming the role of a TV analyst, and can't blame them. That's extra bucks too. The written word, the newspaper thing, is going out. It's going all internet, and so
who is the New York Post? One of the New York Post sports writers. He's always done a lot of color on boxing matches, and I can't think of his name right now.
Don Dunphy?
No.
Larry Merchant?
Larry Merchant, thank you.
Yeah.
That's who it was. Yep, Larry Merchant.
Do I get a bonus question?
Yes.
Who's absolutely right, because guys back then, they were working guys. They did this for money. Like Bob Shepard was a professor of speech at St. John's University out in
That's
Queens.
right.
And I worked with a guy who had him as a professor, and I was about to ask the question. He says, I know what you're going to ask. Yes, he sounds exactly the same way in class. I will now roll.
One of the reasons I think Dick Enberg and Vin Scully said that baseball was the hardest to broadcast is because they studied up on all the players. They told stories about all the players from both teams. They really interjected very interesting things about their families, their different things, and that took work to come up with all that stuff.
Yes,
it was
absolutely
easy. Right.
Absolutely.
They were just
let me just say real quick before I forget this that on YouTube there is a Bob Shepard recreation where he gives the starting lineups of the 1951 Game 1 in the 1951 World Series between the Giants and Yankees.
Oh, yeah.
His first year, it was DiMaggio's last. It was Mickey's first.
Right.
It was David, you just mentioned that your first year going to Yankee Stadium was 51.
That's right.
Mine, too. I was younger than you, but my grandfather took me to all three stadiums in 51. And he took me to a game before Willie got called up in May, and then again afterwards, and he explained how the lineup was reconfigured, how Bobby Thompson went in to play third base and was at center, and I think Lockman had been at first, or it's in left.
The Lockman and Irvin, Monty Irvin traded positions about a month into the season.
And I got all that in 51. And
how old were you, Ralph?
I was 4.5.
You must have been so excited.
Yeah, my grandfather was just like me. He was an old guy who just wanted to go to games. He was basically retired, and he wanted to pass it on, and he'd sit there and he'd say, hit them where they ain't.
Yeah, let me give a book plug for Don DeLillo, who doesn't need a plug from me certainly, but in his book, and the title now escapes me, there's about 100-page that begins with about 100-page description of the game, that the day that Bobby Thompson hit that home run. And if you ever want to read something absolutely spectacular about any sport, especially baseball, you have to read the first 100 pages or so of Don. The book is all about the baseball itself, the ball that Thompson hit. But he describes the game, the polo grounds, the people who are there. in such incredibly good detail that you feel like you're there. I mean, I wish I could remember the name of the book. It's one of his more recent ones, but I can't think of the name. Maybe Al knows. He usually knows these things.
He usually knows everything.
Right.
This one I don't know.
Oh,
but the segment of the 51 game was
it's the excitement of Christmas Eve, Al. It
was called Pafko at the Wall.
That was
Field is standing at the base of the wall there, watching the Thompson ball go in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have that picture in my mind as well, and I'm thinking, was it hit to that nun? Did the nun catch it after all?
No, there was a guy who wrote a book several years ago about the ball. He was trying to chase down the Thompson ball, which at the end became an impossible task because nobody, it wasn't, there weren't cameras pointed at the person or anything like that the way it is today. And he talked to people. He found people who were in that picture. I tried.
Underworld. Underworld is the name
Underworld,
of the Underworld.
Yeah. There you go.
The Lilo book, and it is just that if you don't read the whole thing, just read the first part. It's just wonderful.
All right.
You know what I found interesting on that Bobby Thompson home run was all the Dodgers left the field except Jackie Robinson. And he watched Bobby Thompson round those bases to be sure.
I'm looking at a photo of it right now.
I am too, Gabriel. I'm looking.
That's right.
There's the umpire to the left. There's the pitcher right there, and then there's
That's Branco walking off.
Yeah.
Right.
And Jackie's standing there watching to be sure that he...
Hands on his hips, yep.
Yes.
Amazing. That was something.
Well, that picture is right there because I'm a Giant. I was a New York Giant fan. I got to tell you, it broke a lot of Dodgers' hearts, but it didn't particularly bother me.
Can I tell you a story? Can I tell you a story about that game and a unique way of experiencing it?
Please.
This was told by Ira Glasser, former head of the ACLU, at a symposium in Cooperstown. He talked about that game. He was from Brooklyn, and he raced home from school as the bottom of the ninth was unfolding, and he could hear what was going on, and he finally got home, raced upstairs, turned the TV on, and it took a few minutes for the image to come up, that tiny image. Yeah, and the first thing he saw when the image came up was Laraine Day smiling. And his first thought was, my, isn't she being gracious in defeat? And soon he learned the truth. Meanwhile, his mother was down the street at a store, and they had the radio going, and she had a pile of packages. And when she heard what happened, she raced home because she knew her son was going to be suicidal after what happened.
This is Ira Glass, the composer?
No, Ira Glasser.
Oh, Glasser. Okay.
Yeah. Isn't that great, though? He sees Laraine Day. Oh.
Yeah.
She's taking it well.
I didn't see her at the Polo Grounds. She was there, when Leo was managing.
And speaking of YouTube, they have the Laraine Day, Leo DeRocher. They had a show on. And
What's my line? What's my line?
It was either a pregame or postgame.
A radio show.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're on YouTube, so you can go to YouTube and you can type their names in, and to come up. I listened to one with Alvin Dog the other day, where he was talking about being the manager on the field and going back and forth, him being captain and all.
Ralph,
is absolutely terrific. Yes, sir.
I have one comment to make, and that's nowhere, as far as I know, in recorded history of broadcasting sports or commenting on sports has any group ever segued from Dick Enberg to Lorraine Day as well as we have. I think
took some doing to
get
it around
to
that.
I could actually hit the gutter here a little further because when Carl Erskine had come on and was so kind to be a guest on our Monday Night Sports Talk show a couple of years back, I was studying when that night Julius Rosenberg and Sing Sing had cabled Ethel and said, the worst possible thing that happened just happened. Talking about the game and thinking, oh, my Lord.
Oh, wow.
So now we've gone from Dick Enberg to Julius Rosenberg.
Wow.
Just told me something they communicated when they were in jail. I didn't know that. I had no idea that they had that capability of communicating.
Well, I imagine he was able to get a message out.
That's so funny.
Well, they weren't executed for another 3 years or so.
Yeah, they're executed.
They may not have even been the death penalty. It takes a long time for that to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably how that came about.
Little before my time, was that just? Were they framed, or was that a justice execution?
It's come to a conclusion.
No execution is just. You might.
No, Julius was guilty, and they needed to. But the federal government needed to execute them to.
As a warning, as a
shut the Reds up because there were purges in all the Eastern European countries that. Stalin took over after World War II.
It was a very trying time. I remember in my neighborhood in the Bronx because it was considered a shanda.
Yeah, a guy I worked with for years was named Rich Rosenberg. I'm still in contact with him periodically, even though we're both retired for quite a while. I asked him, I said, because of your last name, were you ever asked about Julius and Ethel? He said you wouldn't believe.
Yeah. But just the fact that they were Jews from New York and
Jews, big fear going on with Jews.
A big
all
fear.
These abuse things. Not many Jewish names are coming up in this. Weissman and Dustin Hoffman and just a bunch of
Weinberg, you mean? Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein, yeah.
Yeah. There's a disproportionate amount.
Well,
they're not the only people.
And Al Franken. Don't forget Al Franken.
And who's Charlie Rose, for Christ's sake. And the number of people, not just Jews, but that you wouldn't expect in Garrison Keillor, the head of NPR, guy sits in a wheelchair. Kevin Spacey. We're talking about just incredibly talented, just, are they all just, is this society just going crazy on us day by day?
I take back my earlier statement. I think we've extended the string way beyond, starting with Dick Enberg.
Well, let's segue to what I really wanted to talk about today, and I want to bring Chad into this because Chad Rubin is here, and he is one of those people that got to follow the expansion era a little bit, and his Minnesota Twins came out of that genre when the expansion Washington Senators were born. The original Senators went to Minnesota. And so let's start our expansion talk with the expansion Washington Senators. I want to precede it by saying that Branch Rickey precipitated expansion when it happened. In creating the Continental League, he basically forced baseball to expand, and it's uncanny how many of the teams in the original Continental League proposal ended up getting major league franchises.
And let's not forget Bill Shea either, Zig, because he really had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
No question about that. No question about that. But ironically, expansion came a year before in the American League than it did in the National League. I've always been unclear of how Calvin Griffith pulled it off so he could take his franchise to Minnesota, and the new franchise in Washington was the Senators. How do any of you guys know how that came about? I want clarity on that. How he pulled it off, because
well, from what I've read, he had the owners in his pocket because basically they don't disapprove moves unless there's a reason not to. Okay, and the owners say their thinking is that we get into a position where we have to move. We don't want to vote against this particular guy. And supposedly, I don't know whether this is true, but I've read this in a couple of places. He decided on Minneapolis because they didn't have very many minority people there.
Right. He actually said it. He actually spoke to a Rotary Club, and when soon after they moved out to Minneapolis, and he gave them that explanation that it was a nice white community. No subtleties there at all.
No, none at all.
But I think part of it too is that the St. Louis Browns had moved to Baltimore, and I don't think Major League Baseball had the unity that it has today. And so I think in terms of moving, he said we're going to take the franchise with us, and I said okay. I mean, it wasn't like they had any reason to not let them take the records to Minneapolis.
Vec originally
he was pretty powerful too.
Originally wanted to move the Browns to Milwaukee, and of course the American League owners, who hated his guts, voted him down. And that's where Perini, who was cast for playing the Boston Braves, and they had Milwaukee as their AAA farm team.
Right.
Decided to move there. That was only a couple of weeks before the season opened that year.
Do you know the irony of what you guys are talking about is that the Minnesota Twins, when they won in '65, they were chock full of black players.
Yes, they were.
Batty was the catcher. Vic Power was the first baseman. If I'm not mistaken, he was there in '65.
I don't think so.
Oliva
was a Cuban, but a black Cuban. Yes. And the way things were at that time, the craziness of it all is that even before Jackie, you could be a Cuban if the color of your skin was a certain way and what have you. That's all craziness.
So crazy.
To begin with.
Chad, what do you know about it?
Well, I think expansion in all sports in 1960 has to do with being able to fly. They no longer needed to take trains. I mean, NFL expanded in 1960.
Yeah.
Major League Baseball expanded in 1960. Hockey was right after that. I mean, they all expanded right after that time because you had an explosion of being able to travel.
Yeah, and television. The explosion of television was the other big factor.
That's true.
Right. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, you'd have to say the Dodgers, though, were the first to sort of push the envelope, though.
Right.
And how
yeah,
are you going to
I
get
agree.
out to Los Angeles? How are you going to get to San Francisco? And the train, you couldn't take a train all the way from New York to Minneapolis or to,
Yep.
Well, to Minneapolis, you probably could. But you're right. From New York to Los Angeles would have been much too much. Interesting. During the war, when they went from Cleveland to Detroit and vice versa, they used to take a ferry as opposed to the train because it was much faster to go across the lake than to go around the lake.
That's very interesting.
Right.
Yeah. And also
let's talk about the Los Angeles Angels expansion, because they were, as far as I know, the quickest team in baseball to expand and become competitive almost instantaneously. I seem to remember them going not down the stretch, but well into the end of August in 1962, their second year of existence, against the Yankees.
Yep.
So, Gabriel, you were kind of witness to this a little bit, if I'm not.
Well, the thing is, they had that one great year, but then they kind of reverted to where expansion teams usually settled. I mean, they had that one exceptional year in '62. They got great. I mean, Daddy Wags, I think, was the big force there. Leon Wagner.
Leon Wagner, yes. Former
and Alfie Pearson. I know. What a combination, those two. And I'm looking at it. Lee Thomas at first base had a huge year, and Dean Chance led the pitching staff.
But people have to run.
Those were Bo Belinsky years as well.
Ralph, I've got to go.
Okay,
Al. I have to take care of. Okay, are we on Tuesday or no?
We are on Tuesday.
Okay. Speak to you then.
All right, take care. Have a good one.
Have a good holiday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Al. Merry Christmas
Al.
to you. And a happy Hanukkah, I would have to say. Got to throw Hanukkah in there.
Even though it's over.
Even though it's over, right. But it
was fun while it lasted.
Yep.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Now, with the Angels, I don't recall that they were stocked the way the Mets were stocked by, each team giving a few players, which was one of the reasons the Mets were so terrible in their first couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
They got the dregs, although they not all were dreg players, but they were way past their prime, and went to the Mets. But I don't recall that being the case with the Angels. I could be wrong.
Well, I don't know if it was drafting technique. I think they changed the rules after the American League drafted. When it came time for the National League,
I think that's correct.
Can you tell me about that, Gabriel?
I can't tell you the numbers, but the teams were allowed to protect more players before the National League draft. I'm not sure. It may have been 20 as opposed to 15, something like that. But they did. They made less available, and at least in the Mets case, I think we can look back and say they drafted a bunch of guys that were ex-Dodgers and Giants, so the fans would have somebody to come out to see. That was almost the first priority in that draft.
Right.
Yeah, and then they drafted, and they picked up Ed Kranepool, who was 18 at the time, and a New York City phenomenal baseball player, and he went right to the Mets. And he was there for about 13, 14 years.
Madison High School, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Had him on these airwaves not long ago, and very, very nice gentleman.
Always nice.
I was a fan of his.
His health recently.
Yeah, I heard that. I didn't know he was ill.
Yeah, he had some sort of kidney problems and diabetes and what have you. So
James Monroe, not James Madison.
Right.
James Monroe High School.
James Monroe, right.
Yes.
And a very, 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 very good first baseman. I mean, and you don't really remember much,
he worked hard. I remember him from when he came up, and he was 17 maybe, or 18.
Yeah.
And over the year, he worked hard. He had to work hard at fielding, at hitting left-handed pitching. And, of course, he became a great pinch hitter. He learned. He was a very smart hitter eventually. He just had to do all his growing up in baseball, in public.
In the majors. Yeah, in the majors.
Yeah.
Oh,
right,
he comes up right out of high school, and there's a very famous story. Casey had talked to him about not pulling the ball, hitting to the opposite field. And Casey's in the clubhouse watching him, and he says, if you pull the ball in batting practice, I'm going to send your ass out. I'm going to send you to the minors. So this is 63, and he's taking batting practice, and Duke Snider, who was finishing up his career with the Mets, great outfielder, all the great hitter, says to him while he's taking batting practice, says, you're too big a guy to go to the opposite field. You got to learn to pull the ball. Hit those inside pitches. Pull them. And the kid is 20. By this time, he's all of 20 years old. Stengel just threatened him. And in front of the press, he says, hey, Duke, save your advice. You ain't doing so good yourself these days. Oh, that makes the paper, and that sets him back. And he explained it on these airwaves a couple of months ago to me. He said,
really?
I was just doing what Casey told me to do. Later on, after this all blew over, I went to Duke and explained to him, blah, 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 and we became friends. I don't think they ever became buddy-buddy, but so that set him back a little bit in New York. And on the first banner day, the Mets were famous. I don't know I think they might have been the first team ever to have banners. They had people coming in,
up banners.
They made a day out of it.
Yeah.
And Kranepool was like 20, and the banner that won the prize is Ed Kranepool over the hill. So if ever there was an example of the press is good in New York, but it will give you a lot of publicity, but the pressure is incredible to play in New York as opposed to anywhere else. They take their baseball almost as seriously as they do in Boston.
Well, but it's knowledgeable. I mean, it's knowledgeable criticism. It's not like some cities where they just criticize teams for not winning. I think in New York they have a certain knowledge, and I think it's true in Boston as well. Although in Boston it seems to me there's a bit more nastiness in the press, and most people who've lived in Boston will acknowledge that the press, like they did with Ted Williams. But the old Mets, I mean, they also had Willie Mays, they had Richie Ashburn. I mean, they had all these future Hall of Famers that were playing out the string.
Right.
Yeah.
I was at the first Mets game in the Polo Grounds. I cut school to go to see that one.
Interesting.
As this happened, they lost.
First Mets game at Shea Stadium and cut school to go to that one. But I do remember the going to many games at the Polo Grounds, and
I went to a lot of Mets games at the Polo Grounds too.
Mm-hmm.
What a great place!
Yes,
it was.
I was there. I was there for the doubleheader where in the first game, Marv Throneberry hit the triple where he missed first and second. And in the nightcap, Lou Brock hit the ball into the bleachers in center. That was the same day.
At that game, too. It was June 23rd. It was a Sunday. And the end of June, I couldn't find...
Oh, was that you, Ralph?
You were the other one, huh?
I was the I was the only 16-year-old with a full beard smoking a joint right out. 1962. It was unbelievable. I had a beret. My mother was screaming at the television, "Shave! You looked so handsome before you grew the beard. Shave!"
Yeah.
But we can't gloss over Lou Bragg, who was with the Cubs then, probably weighed 150 pounds.
Yeah.
And he hit what only 4 or 5 players had done. Joe Adcock, hit a ball to the center field bleachers. This is a 480 feet away, something like that.
Yeah. It was like a 3-iron. It was way up in the air, I remember. And it just stayed up and up and up and just kept going.
For a little.
Anyone remember Stan the Man in July when he hit 4 home runs and 4 at-bats in Polo Grounds?
Yeah.
I was there.
Really?
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I mean, tied the record.
You could hit a home run at 250 feet if you hit it down the foul lines, but if you hit it to center field, you have to hit it
forget it.
80. I mean, yeah, and then don't forget that where they had the players' clubhouses were sort of indented from that, and then up the stairs where the big Chesterfield sign was. But it might have been 480 to the fence, but it was more if you hit it directly into center field because that area was further back, with recess from the fans, from the stands.
Now, do you guys remember going down to the field and walking to the center field?
Sure.
After the game.
That was a treat.
That was a treat. That was
the best
part of the game.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I remember standing out there in center field of Yankee Stadium any number of times and just being in awe of the height and the vastness of the place. And you say to yourself, how could anybody catch that little tiny ball that comes up through that crowd? And where did it go? I mean, it amazed me then. It amazes me now that these guys could catch a ball that's hit with such speed and is moving away from them usually, and they know exactly where it's going.
Well, not just catch a ball, hit a round ball with a round bat and try to hit it squarely.
Right.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be,
comes in,
I don't know,
like
a hockey goalie is as big a skill, but I can't think of anything that, hand-eye coordination. Strictly ball, hit ball.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, what a privilege it is to follow these guys and to look back on our lives and our memories. I love doing this on Sunday. Thank you, guys.
I do too.
It's terrific.
Thanks, Dave.
It's been great, Ralph.
Thanks, everybody. Please keep coming back, guys. Stay healthy. Have a wonderful holiday season.
You too, Ralph.
And,
you too. Yep.
I'm blessed for your company, guys. If you're listening out there and enjoying any of our offerings at Comfortably Zoned, please do me a solid. Box up some lightly used children's books and take them down to the Head Start program in whatever city, whatever state you're in, any community. There's a Head Start program in need of books so kids can become reading, school ready, off the streets, get them an interest. Do that for me. I'd appreciate it. And thank you again, guys. We will be back,
Thanks, guys.
Have a wonderful holiday.
Bye-bye.
All right. You too, guys.
Be well, everybody, and see you next week. Adios.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Okay.